Now, many of you follow the regulatory, legal, and technology wrangling between traditional and decentralized financial stakeholders. This morning, we have 4 experts on the subject that will share their observations and analysis with us. Our next panel on traditional versus decentralized finance includes Ralph Benko. He is an international award-winning author and columnist, general counsel to Bitcoin core developer Jeff Galick, nonprofits Washington Power and Light, and to the Fryfly.io, senior counselor to the American Blockchain PAC, whose advisory board is chaired by blockchain co-inventor Scott Sternetta, and he has worked with 3 White House, 2 executive branch agencies, and the Congress, and is a member of the New York State Bar. Additionally, we have Alexander Szul. He is the CEO of Rome Blockchain Labs. His company develops cutting-edge financial technologies for the use of trading institutions, governments, and private individuals. Their technology gives everyone worldwide the opportunity to earn a dignified living through open access of the financial blockchain systems. Then we have Paul Dowding. He is co-founder and head of design for L4S Corp, which has developed a differentiating, configurable, agnostic, real-time, high-capacity, scalable, double-entry accounting layer, a 1DLT protocol for regulated transactions. And then finally, our 4th expert is Steve McCaffrey. He is the senior managing partner of Provinity? Is that how you say it? Provinity? There we go. In his company, customized technology solutions across a broad spectrum of applications and technology includes Salesforce, AI, business intelligence, blockchain, and multiple key technologies applied to multiple business categories. Ladies and gentlemen, our 4 experts, and the moderator will be Ralph, and this is on traditional versus decentralized finance. Do you want to say something?
Hi, everybody. I want to apologize to you guys that essentially need to be caffeinated and are not caffeinated. Apparently, we found out the catering truck had a flat tire on their way over here, right? So I'm caught in a little bit of a squeeze because we literally have 0 time for the break, but you guys need to have caffeine, and I don't want to take time from anybody. So they're setting it up right now. Here's what I want to ask. We don't have any time. I mean, I've been trying to find some way to get like a 10-minute break. We just can't do it. So I know some of you guys went out and got coffee. If you need coffee, not all at the same time, but if you guys can go out there, get your coffee, get a stack, bring it right back in, because you really need to hear what these people have to say. They're brilliant. But I don't want them speaking to an empty room, and I don't want you guys all standing in line for the coffee. So if one by one you can just go out there really quickly, come back in. See, even that's going to be somewhat chaotic. If you really need coffee, go, right? If you can hold off listening to these guys, they're awesome. I'm sorry, I wish we could do something better, but I leave it to you guys to figure out. They're setting the coffee up right now. Right, it's all you.
Welcome, everybody. The only thing I'll cop to is being an expert, as defined by Niels Bohr, the discoverer of quantum mechanics, who defined an expert as someone who's made every possible mistake to his great detriment in a very narrow field. So, welcome.
I resemble that remark.
I'm sorry.
Secondly,
You could argue with him, but he's the guy who told Einstein, don't tell God what to do. So gentlemen, if you would give a sort of 30-second introduction of yourself and 60-second elevator pitch, and then we'll go down the row and we'll start to dig deeper.
sure thing, thank you. Hi guys, my name is Alex Szul. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Rome Blockchain Labs. And Rome Blockchain Labs, or RBL for short, exists to really offer people around the world an opportunity to earn a dignified living through decentralized finance technology. We develop both on-chain applications like lending markets, liquid staking exchanges, as well as off-chain infrastructure services to be able to deliver high-quality rapid data to third parties like banks, hedge funds, even private individuals to use for their own purposes.
Hello, I'm Paul Dowding. I'm co-founder and head of design at L4S Core, and it's a layer 1 protocol called Tapestry X, was designed to meet the requirements of the capital markets in terms of real-time, high-speed, scalable, high-capacity, and actually with double-entry accounting. We produced it so it was agnostic, so we've got also interest in supply chain and other use cases because we can configure any asset and any transaction. We are production ready. We've done a few proof of concepts. We've now got a pipeline of clients and going through the usual series of capital raises that all startups go through. If anyone wants to shed some tears on my shoulder and share their pain, I'm happy to be of service.
I'm Steve McCaffrey, managing partner for Providity. We are a consultancy out in the field who does a lot of blockchain-based applications in the finance industry. We particularly use R3 and Corda, and we're finding a lot of interesting use cases out in the field. Also, we've come across a number of different instances where document management is becoming even more of a blockchain-based application. I think we're still looking for that killer application that kind of works for everybody. That sort of like how ChatGPT has made AI something that everyone is able to access. We're still waiting for that blockchain-based application that does sort of what ChatGPT does. But we're starting to see a little bit of movement out in the field, particularly in the settlements area, which is kind of the first place in banking that you would see that there would be a great opportunity to do this type of decentralization. So,
Thank you. Luckily, we've discovered what you're looking for, so talk to me afterwards.
Okay.
I have a much smarter co-author named Dawn Talbot, who's not here today. Together we wrote a book called Redefining the Future of the Economy, Governance Blocks, and Economic Architecture. And it talks about how to actually build into the system directly the kind of checks and balances that allow you to create investment-grade products, which currently are absent. So because of the fiduciary responsibility on Wall Street, and Dawn worked on Wall Street for 20 years, and she is a mathematical genius as well, they won't touch the blockchain because of their fiduciary responsibilities mean that it's too easy to collude and create a sort of Sam Bankman-Fried situation. Now, the good news is that insight, which can be built right into the chain, is more powerful than oversight. So rather than delegating the job to some poor federal regulators who are underpaid and overworked and understaffed, there are ways using asymmetrical combinatorial mathematics to build the safeguards right into the chain. And so if that's of interest, I have a copy of my book with me. And the really good news about the book is, big reveal, the FDA has just approved it as a safe and effective cure for insomnia. I'll be rich. So, Counselor, would you begin talking about giving us your insights on traditional versus TradFi versus distributed finance?
Is there any specific area you'd like me to start on, or just kind of a general
What's
overview?
your big reveal? What is your
man.
superpower? What have
The
you?
big-
What's going to blow them away, and their jaws are all going to drop, and they'll go, "Oh my God, I'm so glad I came. This the entire thing worthwhile." Just give us that in short form, and then let them waterboard you for the details.
No pressure on that, all right. So I think one thing that's if you're familiar with the decentralized finance space, so who here knows what DeFi is, by the way? Raise your hands. Okay, so a decent amount of people, that's good. So I can get relatively into the weeds without boring you guys. I think one of the things that people need to understand about decentralized finance, and barring kind of the most extreme people who are super anti-centralization in any way, is to understand that DeFi won't exist in 5 years in its present iteration. It just can't succeed. I was in Barcelona a couple of weeks back. We were talking about what will it take to bring the centralized financial market to a $1 trillion market cap, right? Honestly, not something that's too ludicrous by any stretch of the imagination. I think that the present market cap's around $50 billion right now for just decentralized finance platforms. This is 20x from here, which is quite achievable, more or less. But if you look at the adoption rates, DeFi has a big problem, and it's that it's just extremely complex. It's touted, and I mean, our laboratory is building that direction to make financial markets accessible to anyone in the world, right? All you need is a cell phone, internet access, and a little bit of crypto, and you can get started earning yield, trading, investing, things like that. But who here actually knows how to price an option? Or what type of average person, a couple people might, But what average person knows how to, or can make an educated guess, you might say, or investment decision around what assets good to purchase and what's not? What's a good time to buy and what's not? Apart from, buy low, sell high. It's difficult for a lot of people who haven't had high quality education or exposure to financial markets to make these decisions in a way that adds complexities like blockchain, decentralization, DAO governance as opposed to a board of directors. There's a lot of implications that go into decentralized finance that's extremely difficult. Add on top of that the fact that there really isn't much consumer protection in the decentralized system, and you've created a space that's difficult to use, very complex in terms of the financial structures, has practically zero coverage for individual investors. That's kind of a space that's rife for fraud, corruption. That's what we've seen, right? Almost every week there's some hack or some exploit or a rug in a decentralized protocol. Now, does that mean that DeFi shouldn't exist? Absolutely not. I think that being able to branch finance beyond individual boundaries has its benefits. But at the same time, government also has its benefits. It helps protect the investor. It keeps markets fair. For the most part, it does its best to do that, right? And everyone has criticisms about regulators one way or the other, but the fact of the matter is that they exist for a good reason. So when you look at DeFi in its present sense, or in its present situation, can you expect that to succeed? I think not. I think there has to be an overhaul or rethinking of how decentralized finance works, and that's where traditional finance comes in. Is that while traditional finance also has its drawbacks in terms of centralization, market manipulation, corruption, there's also a lot of problems on that side. There are steps that have been taken to simplify the process for a lot of people. So back to my first point, I'll pass this along, to decentralized finance not existing in the way that we understand it today, it's because it will have to iterate in order to survive. If it doesn't, TradFi is going to take over.
Yes, no, I'd agree with some points, and I'll build on that. Alex said the market cap of the DeFi is about $1 trillion.
No, it's 20 billion, or sorry, 50 billion, and I was talking about how to get it to $1 trillion.
Oh, sorry, so we're even smaller.
Yeah.
So when I ran custody operations in the US 25 years ago, I'd moved $20 billion a day through my proof. The FX markets are $5 to $10 trillion a day. The repo markets are in tens of trillions. The custody banks count their assets, which is obviously all the assets, the investor communities, pensions, mutual funds, insurance companies, in hundreds of trillions of dollars. So what you have is this DeFi group with this seemingly innovative technology looking jealously at all these assets from the TradFi world. And you've got the TradFi guys looking at this innovative technology sort of saying, how do we do that? The challenge is, and as Ralph said, if I take I'm your investment advisor and say, I'm going to give you exposure to an asset that's in a sort of open source protocol that we have no recourse to, and they're going to record a transaction and a contract, so-called contract, to another protocol where that will prove everything that we've got and we'll get a great return. But if anything goes wrong, we have no recourse. Would you take that investment? And that's the problem. The fiduciaries and the regulated institutions cannot touch these protocols. Now, on the flip side, what they've shown is that you can actually decentralize finance and create peer-to-peer or B2B transactions. And that's what the blockchain opens up as a potential. The problem is, and if you look at the blockchain, in the institutional world, it's probably been around for 7 years or so, 2015, 16. A lot of things took off. But when you actually look at these protocols from a process engineering and operational perspective, they can't scale, they can't handle a lot of volume, they're not very quick. And rather surprisingly, as they call themselves distributed ledgers, they actually don't have accounting. So they're not generating what's required as outputs to be reconciled to or even report on. So there's a lot of issues, and that's the approach we took with Tapestry X was to say, what are the fundamental requirements of a regulated industry so that we could actually produce a B2B network that operates in real time, is high scalable, can take the volume, but actually generates accounting journals within the hash-linked record. And therefore, you're doing real-time trial balances and balance monitoring and feeding to it. So that's where, at the moment, there's a big gap between the industries. I do believe DeFi is going to show some innovation. I do believe once TradFi gets truly digitized and uses this technology, it could subvert the DeFi world. There's a limited utility and there's problems, as you said, with all the hacks and other things. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen in both sides of industries, and particularly from the regulatory side?
I have a slightly different journey. It hasn't been a day that's gone by when I've looked at some of the settlement work that's going on in blockchain that haven't thought of this. So years ago, I think this is like 2008, I had started working at Citi as an MD and walked in the door. There were about 2,500 people on the team, and the world went crazy in 2008. And there was a whole bunch of reshuffling. I ended up getting on my team a number of folks who were doing retail bank operations type of activities, so settlements, things like that. So I knew over the years, having taken over many teams, that one of the most important things you have to do when you're coming into a new gig like that is to really understand what kind of production activities you have, because you don't want to be the person who's kind of, inheriting the bomb that blows up and no knowledge of it. So I used to always say, before I did anything new, I wanted to understand what was under the hood. So as I was going through, the conversations were always about, where's the servers, where's the appropriate DR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You guys have probably been through that. And so I remember bringing the team that was doing the settlements for the Citi Retail Bank, which is one person, basically. This guy named Oleg. I'll never forget it. So I went through the list of questions that I had prepared, which is, same thing, like where's the data located, where's the DR, blah, 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 blah. He says, well, it's all under my desk. What do you mean? He goes, you see that machine right there? All the settlements for Citi go through my desk right there. So I thought he was kidding, but it was true. It was at in the Citicorp building. That's not the one that's on Long Island City. And so on the 48th floor, there was one machine that all that settlement had gone through, all that time. And if that machine had gone down, I'm not even sure what the ramifications of that would have been, not just for the bank, but for the U.S. economy. And so as the sweat was pouring down, I said, oh my God, I was speechless. And, so I immediately called a bunch of very senior people, and I said, look, we got a problem here. We have to fix this immediately. And, it's just, there's the whole management exercise in trying to make sure that you manage through that correctly. Ultimately, we got it, pushed into a appropriate DR environment and an appropriate computing environment that would be reflective of something that's that important to the bank and the economy, not just under Oleg's desk. One machine. So fast forward, I remember over the last couple of years, we've been talking a lot about and doing some work and just consulting work with the Italian banking system that's actually doing settlements with using Corda, and it works pretty well. And it cuts out such a significant amount of middlemen and different processes and procedures between the banks, and it really has shown itself to be a really, really important, and certainly I think a great prototype for how settlements can be done and transactions can be really decentralized overall across the banking systems between big systems. And so every time I saw all the appropriate systems activities that were going on with the new things that we're doing, which had all the appropriate monitoring, all the appropriate metrics and so forth, and certainly I think if one of the connections or the change goes down, there's different opportunities and ways to fix that. I'm always thinking back to that original single desk opportunity and realize we've actually come a long way. I think we have a long way to go, but certainly I think there's the groundwork is being laid overall, particularly in settlements, which I think is a good first step. We've also seen a lot of opportunities and applications going up in the repo space as well, as you're mentioning. And a number of companies like Broadridge and several others are actually really running platforms on that. It takes a while for them to get their customers to get comfortable with the idea of utilizing these types of technologies, because people think of it as crypto. When we try to really be careful to take crypto out of it, it's DLT, the way we think about it. And so I think the more that you spend time when you have those conversations with people who don't understand what the stuff is and how it works, we found it's really important to take the word crypto out of it and make it more of a DLT-based discussion. That's a much better way to get people to understand and certainly to feel more comfortable that this is a technology that actually makes sense moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If you're looking to raise on a blockchain-based service, just keep crypto out of it, categorize it as fintech or something else that uses blockchain or uses DLT, because the second people hear crypto, even if it is a legitimate use case for it, that is fully regulatory compliant, fully within the purview of that project, people don't want to touch it. So I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think overall, when you think of decentralized finance space and the traditional finance space, there's a couple broad categories you have to consider in terms of requirements for accessing financial markets for each one. The first big one is going to be risk tolerance. So traditional markets are, even the most risk enthusiastic groups, or risk, what's the word I'm looking for? Prone, you might say, are nothing in comparison to how decentralized financial markets work. People in DeFi will leverage insane amounts of money on the most volatile asset with just the hopes that it pays off. They'll see a protocol that's paying 150% APY and say, yeah, that makes sense. There's a method of thinking. I don't even know if we can call it investment, perspective. It's like a YOLO type approach that is endemic to the way decentralized financial markets operate. Now, of course, not every protocol operates that way. Not every investor thinks that way. But the fact that everyone's laughing the jokes, you guys know that it's pretty spot on. So there was actually a report that came out recently that for most traditional banks to even consider investing into decentralized markets, they would need a stable 20% year-over-year yield in the US dollar. 20% returns, stable. That's unreal. It just ain't gonna happen. You're not gonna find stable returns at 20% in any decentralized system because the risk is so high. The second category to look at is regulation, right? Is that, just like Paul said, DeFi protocols to a large extent are able to do things that traditional institutions can't get away with, right? And there's a couple of legitimate reasons for that. Some of them are disintermediated. Some of them operate out of domiciles that aren't covered by US regulations and actually geo-block Americans that way they can't even access it to avoid SEC regulation. And there's a lot of innovative ways of applying capital, I guess you would say applying capital that can't be done in a way that isn't on a blockchain. So like fractionalized NFTs, for example, you can kind of mirror some of those in traditional markets, but I won't get into a DeFi rabbit hole here. The point being that there's ways of acting in DeFi that a lot of places can't do, that they want to do. And the kind of third general approach is actually just maturity of the space itself. DeFi has only been around since 2020-ish. That's 3 years of operation, right? Think back to when blockchain was around, Bitcoin was around for 3 years, right? It was still practically a joke. Very few people heard about it. But you've seen what it's become now, over $1 trillion market cap in about 10 years. So with DeFi having $50 billion in TVL, more or less overall, imagine what that can be in 7 more years. It's quite compelling to look at. So when I was talking about that blend that has to happen between the two sides, if you talk to any large-scale decentralized project, RBL included, we're looking at the institutional actors as that kind of, castle on a hill, so to speak. There's, just like Paul said, so much liquidity. The security, I'm sure, is much better now on Wall Street, but there's a lot of benefits that can come from using DLT, right? And if you look at the maturity of the traditional markets, 100 years plus of operations. It doesn't have to be kind of dove into in that respect. But these are the things to consider: is risk, regulation, and then market maturity when you're looking at how to compare these two fields.
And so, Paul.
I was going to say, I'll agree with Alex on the risk, and I want to just take a different point of view on some other things. When some of these DeFi protocols come out, when you have margin, you have what's called a haircut. And I apologize, my barber was 6 next week, so I didn't have my haircut in time for the conference. But what it really means is I'm going to post, say, 110% of the value, and your haircut is 10%. Some of these DeFi protocols come up, the original haircut was 700%. So you had to post 7 times the value of your bet in collateral, which obviously said there's something risky going on here. So that was just to forewarn you on that. What I unfortunately I'd say is that actually the DeFi world is reinventing what the TradFi has done. If you look at digitization, really, well, look at an ETF, look at an American depository receipt. It's taking an asset somewhere and creating a different version of it. It's taking paper shares and creating electronics. That's sort of tokenization. They actually have decentralization. They're called OTC markets. They're just not very efficient because everybody has to find each other and then settle with each other bilaterally. So the real thing that DeFi did was take these things and show you how to do them quicker. And actually, potentially corrupt evident with the blockchain. Unfortunately, it's corrupt evident, and we've seen that corruption. And then the real problem in speed with the traditional finance is you agree a transaction, you execute it. Then you record it. Both parties record it. Then we settle it somehow through a central authority. And then maybe next day or end of week or end of month, we reconcile it and find out what went wrong. And at the end of the quarter, we get audited. At the end of the year, we may get audited. Now, if you look at FTX, what did they do? They had no internal controls, no accounting, no audits. So they were allowed to do whatever they wanted. They were actually a representation of TradFi in terms of, because again, I'll point to the fact that all the crypto exchanges do not use blockchains for their own ledgers. They use classic ledgers. Why? Because blockchain technology today is not capable of being a ledger. But now, if we can take the ideas and the technology of DeFi and speed up that process of agree, record, settle, reconcile, and account, and bring it to real time, now you've got real-time transparency in terms of what's happening privately with the individuals, but on an aggregate basis with the regulators. And that's the opportunity I see in terms of the technology and potential.
I would say, thinking about that as a step further as well, what we're seeing in the field is in card processing. So last few years, we've been working on a number of different projects. And when you think about when you swipe your card, we've come up with a maximum of about 48 different sub-transactions that need to happen in order for that payment to work from all the different parties that are part of that transaction. And talking about haircuts, right? It's basically a barbershop convention of haircuts that eventually that those costs get passed on to the consumer or the merchant in certain cases. But what we've been finding is that if we use DLTs appropriately, we could cut out 75% of those haircuts and get to a point where the consumer and the merchant would see a significantly less overall overhead and cost when it comes to dealing with those transactions. So to me, that's one of those things where if it's done properly, the consumer would notice nothing but less fees if they have, depending on how they worked out their agreements, and the merchant would as well. But the things happening in the background would be essentially transparent to the folks. And to me, that's when you have a really good solution, which is it works the way people understand it today. It just works better overall. And I think within the next few years, we'll start to see those types of applications pop up because they have huge value and people would really benefit from. Now, certainly, there's a lot of the haircut people who may have a different view on that, and they've become fabulously wealthy based on that, and that's all well and good. But I think with natural consolidation and efficiencies that typically drive capital markets and capitalism, there's no doubt this is coming down the pike, and we're seeing the real aspects of it. There are a lot of regulatory hurdles towards making this happen, but it is going to happen. It's just a matter of time at this point.
Yeah, I think the key to decentralized finance really taking off in tremendously innovating the way that financial markets operate in every across the entirety of the spectrum is actually something that DeFi takes for granted, and that's the concept of disintermediation. So if you think of traditional markets, there's always some intermediary facilitating an exchange back and forth between one player to another. You have a broker, you have centralized exchanges, the list goes on and on and on, right? And everybody gets their pound of flesh, everybody gets a haircut across that, and you pass those costs on the consumer to foot the bill. And that's a tremendously inefficient way of operating, of exchanging capital. Even the most basic DeFi primitive is what they're called, like for example, a decentralized exchange, called an AMM, automated market maker. It allows the OTC-esque level of buy and selling of immediate exchange to happen via liquidity pools, which are just baskets of assets, 2 or 3 or 4 sets of assets that sit into a pool that people trade into. And as the ratio of token A to token B changes, the market value changes. So there's automated price discovery. And the settlement happens within the block time. So Ethereum 15 seconds, Avalanche 3 seconds, so on and so forth. So you have automated price discovery, instant settlement. These are things that are completely innovative. In DeFi, I don't think a lot of people in DeFi actually understand that they haven't really, gotten that yet. It's like somebody who was given a Ferrari as their first car and doesn't know how cool it is. It's like, this is really innovative stuff that hasn't quite been pushed. And I think that the fear that a lot of people have when they do realize this, that doesn't really even need to be held on to in all frankness, is that regulators don't know how to regulate this stuff, honestly. So if there is some failure in a decentralized exchange that's ran by like 100 people from around the world, most of whom aren't even in the US, and someone loses their money, how do you go after that, right? Or if you have a smart contract that's operational on a blockchain that's globally distributed that cannot be shut down, how do you control that, right? You can't. It's actually impossible to do that. So regulators are in a bit of a pickle where they're like, okay, well, we can't enforce anything. We can't stop it from functioning. It's not even it's not even practically in our jurisdiction. So where's our place? And I think that existential threat or question or whatever you want to call it is why, especially specifically the SEC, has been so hard-fisted in their regulation by enforcement. Now, I'm not criticizing Commissioner Gensler, but I must say that there's a.
I will. So give me. I'll land hard with both feet. Just give me a.
I wasn't done.
Oh,
But
okay.
because he's put in a very difficult position, right? His job is to ensure consumer protection and market stability, but his levers don't work here. So what can he do? And he has kind of two options, and I personally think he's choosing the wrong one, which is just try to like squeeze everything into the Securities Act of 1933, make it fit within the framework, and say if it doesn't fit here, then you go to CFTC. Otherwise, make it fit. That's wrong. That's not how you do this. The way you do it is actually what I recommend Hester Pierce suggested, which is, I think she called it like a regulatory beach or something, where you have the SEC and other regulators as lifeguards that let people in this space kind of build whatever they want, go out into the water, kind of have fun, explore, and if they get a little too risky, the lifeguard goes out and pulls them back in. And they say, okay, this is about this limit for this area. And then you can apply proper frameworks to encourage valuable and organic growth and innovation in that tech space. That's how I think that this should be done. So if anyone from the SEC is watching, call me.
Being the resident mudblood, I want to take things down from the wizarding level for a minute to the muggle level, because most of our officials, whether appointed or elected, are muggles like me, and they actually have their own kind of genius. I don't have to live underneath the steps in a little cabinet and whatever, but I've been here for 40 years, and I've found a way that things work. First of all, this may sound stupid because it is, but please, I would beg everybody in this room to stop saying DeFi and instead saying decent, okay? The problem with DeFi, it's a homonym for defiance, and when regulators and fiduciaries hear that, it raises their hackles, okay? And by the way, it comes from the kind of anarcho-capital early days of the crypto world, Mt. Gox and the sort of Mos Eisley Cantina, and so it's culturally consistent, but it does not serve us well. If we use a shorthand for decentralization, decent versus DeFi, okay, sends a subtext message to the regulators and to the fiduciaries that we're not a bunch of anarcho-capitalists who are defying authority. So I just want you to think about that. Second thing is that the biggest problem with crypto is it's cryptic, but it's not a currency. According to Jevons, the great economist who defined moneyness, there are three elements to money, and that is medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. And neither Ethereum nor Bitcoin have any of that. They score zero on moneyness, and they always will for reasons I won't get into today. But the point is, the glamour of it all, all of those roller coaster price swings and chances of spending $380 million worth of Bitcoins on pizza last Monday, right, is just so glamorous that it's blinding us to the real power of the blockchain, which is as a platform. Okay, the power of the blockchain as a platform once the bottlenecks get broken, which Paul is among the leaders of breaking those bottlenecks, for instance, scaling, right? Bitcoin, 7 transactions per second. Ethereum, 70 transactions per second. Now, there are some L2s that allow you to scale up, but at the cost of re-centralization, okay? But with wizards like Paul decrypting this, if you will, then what we're going to do eventually is find the golden needle in the blockchain haystack, which happens to be as a platform. In the classical web, okay, only about 1% or fewer of your transactions are financial in nature. Okay, when you send an email, when you use your Google Maps, when you surf the web, those are not financial transactions. The number of financial transactions you perform with PayPal or whatever it happens to be is trivial. Okay, the mother lode is in the use of the blockchain as a platform, which brings me to want to emphasize something that the gentleman on the end there, whose name I've shamefully forgotten already, but remind us, Stephen, makes out, and that's, look, nobody, I don't know about where you drink, maybe it's the Mos Eisley Cantina, but I don't hear anybody at the local bar saying, wow, it's just so darn centralized, You have real pain points, and that is, as he said, there are 48 levels of a credit card transaction. I didn't know the number, I'm going to steal it from you, but thank you. That adds up to about 3% of the gross sale. Does anybody here know what the profit margin of a grocery store is? 1%, right? So the fact that you are spending 3 times the profit margin of the grocery store in the grocery store on your credit card transaction is a huge opportunity to create more streamlined, efficient, and frictionless payment settlement mechanism that will save both the merchant and the customers big bucks. So that's addressing a common pain point as opposed to something esoteric like centralization. So I just recommend that you guys go hang out with us muggles a little bit more and find out what we're talking about, what we're whining about, figure out whether the blockchain is the appropriate solution. You don't want to end up with Maslow's hammer. Abraham Maslow, founder of humanistic psychology, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, okay? The blockchain is a valuable tool in our kit, and it's just one of them, so. 1 minute and 46 seconds, they're all yours, Steve.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do you want to take a last minute? I'll show you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just thinking too, just to further some of the comments here. I was just thinking back in my roles in banking over the years. I spent so much time at the OCC, probably half of my time. Yet 2008 still happened. Yet SVB still happened, and several others along the way. But I was thinking about, during that time, I remember just before the pandemic, I was in China speaking at a conference that somebody asked me to talk about sort of this type of stuff at the last second. And the entire, this is basically a Chinese university, I can't remember the name of it, but it was also obviously associated with the CCP. And they were literally talking about how they wanted to take the world over and take the US dollar out as the world's settlement currency, utilizing these types of assets, and it was pretty scary. I mean, it was interesting to be in the room with that. We were one of the only 2 Americans, and so I would say from our perspective, we need to think about that and how to legislate appropriately 1933 in a way which is certainly a lot more modern, that utilizes these tools and these capabilities pretty quickly at this point. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind.
Thank you. You have
I'll bring
20,
it full,
20 seconds to ask.
Ralph, can I bring it full circle?
Oh, please,
Because
bring it home.
I think coffee is the first FDA
Bring it home.
cure for insomnia, and it's waiting for us out.
I was just going to say they have 10 seconds to ask us questions, so make it quick. Paul, would you wrap it up?
No, I just said I think coffee is the first FDA-approved cure for insomnia. It's waiting outside for us.
Damn the competition. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.